Hi everyone, welcome to Rare Disease Month.
We
support rare.
I am well.
I'm rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
My name is Victoria Jackson and I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi, I am rare.
I am rare.
I'm Brandy Leader from Houston, Texas, and I'm a rare disease warrior.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi everyone, welcome to Rare Disease Month.
We
support rare.
I am well.
I'm rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
My name is Victoria Jackson and I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi, I am rare.
I am rare.
I'm Brandy Leader from Houston, Texas, and I'm a rare disease warrior.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi everyone, welcome to Rare Disease Month.
We
support rare.
I am well.
I'm rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
My name is Victoria Jackson and I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi, I am rare.
I am rare.
I'm Brandy Leader from Houston, Texas, and I'm a rare disease warrior.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi everyone, welcome to Rare Disease Month.
We
support rare.
I am well.
I'm rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
My name is Victoria Jackson and I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hi, I am rare.
I am rare.
I'm Brandy Leader from Houston, Texas, and I'm a rare disease warrior.
I am rare.
I am rare.
I am rare.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Orphan Jackson, and I'll be providing technical support on behalf of Zoom and Rocket Pharma. Please note that you are encouraged to use the Q&A function to submit questions and the chat function to connect with fellow attendees. I would now like to introduce Canary Patel, Chief Operating Officer of Rocket Pharma. Canary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Oren. And everyone that has joined this webinar, thank you so much. We're excited to have you here. If we can have the first slide of the presentation pulled up, please. Welcome to the Rare Disease Day. As you know, normally Rare Disease Day we would celebrate on the rarest day of the month, February 29th or February 28th, in lieu of not having the 29th in some of the years. However, what we have decided to do is overcome the challenge of COVID-19 and pandemic in an unusual year we are all facing to make this a global event and instead of a one-day celebration, a month-long celebration. So our hope is that you will be joining us not just today, but in each of the Fridays of this month to celebrate with us and help recognize and raise awareness for rare diseases and the unmet medical need that really challenges the community and millions of patients worldwide. Next slide, please. Specifically, I am so honored that our creative team from Rocket Pharmaceuticals as well as RTW Foundation has helped us come up with a great panel. I am excited to have somebody that I've considered as a role model, as I've been in the rare disease space for 15 years, and my passion of knowing that a person, a mother, can make a difference that helps millions of patients, somebody that I inspire to be one day like, and to make even one fraction of the difference she's made, is Abbey Meyers. And thanks to Dr. Gayatri Rao, we were able to have Abbey come and talk to us today on her quest to make a difference in rare diseases and the amazing work she's done over the last 3+ decades. Next week, we will have a session on power of genetic testing. There are a lot of questions that are out there. What is genetic testing? Is it good for me? Should I do it? Who pays for it? How do I go through the challenges of understanding the data? So we have an amazing panel of patients as well as genetic testing experts that are put together to walk through these questions that many families face every day. The subsequent week, we're going to talk about really participating in clinical trials. As you know, rare diseases don't have that many therapeutic options available. So this session is going to be really focused on clinical trials in cell and gene therapy, because the clinical trials and how we conduct them in this arena are very different than what we do in small molecule types of studies. So our experts that are from US and representing Europe clinical sites that treat patients, mostly pediatrics, but treat adult and pediatric patients through the complicated components of cell and gene therapy clinical trial participation, will walk patients and families through the questions they may have. And the last Friday of the week, we're going to be talking about how to bring a community together. So many rare diseases are so rare that they don't have the support system formalized and in a process put together. But as you know, when you're facing a devastating challenge of learning that your loved one has a rare disease, you want to be able to get help. You want to know where to get the information, who else is struggling with it, where are the key experts in the world that are located that can help you treat this disease. So this session is devoted to putting a community together through patient advocacy works and forming advocacy forums for these rare diseases. So we'll have panelists that talk about that. As well, what I'm excited to say is the next component, as you know, Rocket Pharmaceuticals, on the next slide, please. Rocket Pharmaceutical has started a campaign 2 years ago to light up for rare. We are headquartered in New York City at the Empire State Building, and with the help of our community, we were able to change the lights for Rare Disease Day for Empire State Building. And we were also able to last year add NASDAQ Towers, that is visited by 1 million+ people around the world in a day, to also recognize Rare Disease Day struggles as well as challenges and opportunities for advancements. This year, we've partnered with Nord in order to light up as many monuments around the world and many landmarks as possible. Some of the landmarks we have secured to date that our team has done a fabulous job include Niagara Falls, Capitol Hill, and yes, I'm an Eagles fan, so excited that we have the Eagles stadium in there as well. We're also trying to light up some other monuments in Europe and specifically in UK and Spain, so more to come. So please join our efforts. The sky's the limit on what we can achieve as a community. This is a great way for each patient, each family that's struggling in the rare disease space to be recognized and to realize that they're not alone in their struggles. So before we start the day, I want to take 2 minutes to go through the next 2 slides on what is a rare disease. Rare disease, next slide, please. Rare disease, to date, there have been over 7,000 rare diseases identified. In the US, we define rare disease as a disease that impacts less than 200,000 patients or people in the US at the time. And if you look at that, on one hand, you'd say it's only a few 100,000 patients or people impacted in US. Why is this a big deal, right? But if you combine that with the 7,000+ rare diseases out there, it actually impacts 30 million Americans and 300 people worldwide. That is a significant amount of population in the world that is impacted, unfortunately, by these rare diseases. Our goal is really simple. Our goal is to provide global awareness of rare diseases and to provide support to the community that is unfortunately facing these challenges of finding a therapeutic option. So our campaign is really to say, I am rare, hear me roar, and we believe that alone we are rare, but if we unite as a community, we are very strong and we can move mountains. Next slide, please. In terms of mountains, as you see, this is an image that I talk about many times across many presentations. It's an iceberg. So while we feel in 2020s that there is such an advancement in science that it's happened, what we may not realize is of the 7,000 plus rare diseases that are out there, only a few hundred of these actually have a therapeutic option. So we're only uncovering the tip of the iceberg of the diseases we're able to treat and provide hope to patients. There's a lot more underneath this water that we haven't even addressed. So my goal is really simple. Let's bring the scientists, physicians, experts around the world, as well as pharmaceutical biotech companies and patient advocacy groups to unite to address so the tip of the iceberg one day will be revealed and we will have a lot more treatment options available and approved in US, Europe, and around the globe. There are so many rare diseases, and unfortunately, many of these rare diseases do tend to be serious and life-threatening. Unfortunately, more than 50% of them, in fact, impact pediatrics and kids. So let's help save the next generation of patients that are struggling. And we can really do this by treating one patient with the highest quality product at a time. And that's really the mission that we have at Rocket. Next slide, please. What I want to do is to say thank you to all of the team members at Rocket Pharma and R2W Charitable Foundation that has really partnered with us in making this amazing event happen in the middle of pandemic, in the middle of challenges. To make all of this happen, it really does take a village and individuals that are creative and passionate. So thank you everyone on this list for your for all the work that you've done to make this possible and to help us raise awareness. And thank you to each of the presenters and panelists that are going to be participating in this series, as well as to you, the attendees. We really appreciate you being part of this because you are one more voice that we're adding to the table that can help educate the world on the unmet medical need that still exists here. With that, may we go to the next slide, please. What I would like to do is introduce our first panel, and the moderator for this panel is Dr. Gayatri Rao. Dr. Gayatri Rao serves as a global program head for our Lenti programs, which are the ex vivo gene therapy programs aimed to find one and done potentially curative therapies to patients, mostly addressing pediatric rare diseases. We're excited to have Dr. Rao join Rocket almost 3 years ago, as she is an expert in rare diseases. Prior to joining Rocket, she was the director of Office of Orphan Product Development in the US FDA, where she was responsible for statutory amendments and guidances put forth to help more products become available to market and to be available to patients with rare diseases. During her tenure, she saw a dramatic increase in rare disease requests. So she's helped oversee over 2,000 orphan designations to be granted and over 250 orphan exclusivities to be granted. Amongst many of her achievements during her time at the FDA, she's also made rare pediatric disease priority review voucher programs be put into place, as well as launched the need for natural history products and grant programs to support that. Because as you could imagine, these rare diseases are so challenging and so new that the more we learn about the natural history of the disease, the better we can come together as a community to address the unmet medical need. So with this, I would like to turn the platform over to Dr. Gayatri Rao to welcome and initiate our session for today. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Rao.
Thank you so much for that really warm welcome, Canary. Well, welcome, everyone. And I have to tell you, it is such a privilege for me to be here today with all of you and to have an opportunity to chat with Abbey Meyers, who, if you're in the rare disease community, you know that she is truly a giant within this community. So it's a real privilege for me to be able to speak with her. See, I met Abbey about 10 years ago when I took over running the Office of Orphan Products Development at FDA. Now you see that office came into being over 30 years ago, back in 1983. And it really just had one purpose. And the purpose was really to implement the Orphan Drug Act. Now this act was passed by Congress in 1983. And it was passed by Congress really to incentivize the development of therapies for rare diseases. See, before this act was passed in 1983, in the decade leading up to it, it's reported that only about 10 products were approved that were made by industry leading up to the passage. So think about that, only 10 products in the decade leading up to the passage of the Orphan Drug Act. Now, when you think about it within the context of the thousands of rare diseases that have been identified and the collective millions of patients who are affected by these diseases, the unmet medical need is really quite staggering. Now, how did this act even come to be? And what is it that this act did? Well, this act really provided important, critical financial incentives to companies to really motivate them to start developing in this space. Incentives like tax credits and waivers of fees, and most importantly, market exclusivity. So how did this act, like I said, even come to be? Well, this act really came to be, and it's really not an understatement, this act really came to be because of the efforts of one Abbey Meyers. And without giving too much away here, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Abbey Meyers, who without which the orphan drug industry, as we now know, wouldn't have existed. So Abbey, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. So let's take a step back here. I'm thinking in the late 70s, early 80s. Take us back to that time and tell us how it all got started.
Well, it's important to remember that what you just said, that there really were no treatments or very few treatments on the market for the treatment of a rare disease. And so very often just getting the diagnosis was caused a death or irreversible damage to people. At that time, my oldest son, was diagnosed with a disease which at the time was extremely rare. I mean, you could count on the number of figures of how many people were diagnosed with a disease called Tourette syndrome. And it was a neurological movement disorder. And most of it was repetitive movements, whether it was blinking of the eyes or movements of the legs or the arms. And there were also some audible issues there, with some people made noises that they couldn't control, that they couldn't stop. And so this was a disease that teachers didn't want to hear about. A child who makes noises is not welcome in an open classroom.
How old was your son, Abbey? How old was your son when he was diagnosed?
He was about 8 or 9 years old when we got the diagnosis, and he had the symptoms since he was 2.
Wow, so it took about 6 years to get diagnosed.
Yes, but I remember I opened up a letter one day, and out fell a dollar bill, an old dollar bill that had been, it looked like all the ink was off it, but it was a $1 bill. And the letter said, "I have been in this mental hospital for my entire life. I'm 50 years old now. Long ago, somebody gave me $1 and I put it in my shoe to save it for when I can finally send it so that somebody starts working on a cure for this. And so it is so moving to hear the stories of people who had been diagnosed as behavioral problems or psychiatric problems. And it was a neurological movement disorder. When they said, I can't stop it, they were saying the truth. And so there was one drug on the market that was approved for treatment of Tourette syndrome, and it was terrible. If you took that, you'd go right to sleep. And so that wasn't helping in school at all. We tried a number of other drugs that weren't there. And my son's doctor said he was doing a clinical trial on a disease, on a drug that was approved in Europe for other diseases. And he said, I could put him in that clinical trial if you want to do that. And it was a drug that he called Pimozide at that time. And we did. And the drug was far superior to anything else that he had taken. Didn't put him to sleep. He was able to stay awake in a full day of school. And it helped with a lot of his symptoms. Well, we had to go back every 3 months. And on one of our visits every 3 months, the doctor said, I have to stop this clinical trial. The manufacturer doesn't want me to continue because they decided not to approve this drug in the United States. They were trying to develop it for another prevalent disease. They found it didn't work on the prevalent disease, and they really didn't care that kids with Tourette syndrome were being helped. And so
do you know how many kids were taking it for Tourette's at the time?
Oh, I'd say less than 100, because so few people were diagnosed, especially children. It was heartbreaking, but the doctor explained, he says, this is what you call an orphan drug. An orphan drug is a drug for a rare disease, and nobody wants to make it because they always count on their profitability according to the size of the market. So if you're going to develop something for high blood pressure, sure, everybody was interested in that because it was millions of people. But if it was a small patient population, companies generally did not want to go near them. So I figured I'm going to do something about this. I really was not going to let it just slide, because it wasn't just my son. It was a lot of other people too. And so I got involved with the Tourette Syndrome Association, and I became, I think it was director of legislative activities or something like that. We had nothing on legislative activities, but we had to solve this problem. And because I was a volunteer for the Tourette Syndrome Association, I was able to call other support groups for other diseases, particularly movement disorders, and say, you know, if a scientist finds a treatment for your disease, would somebody manufacture it? Do you know? And I called Marjorie Guthrie, who was the widow of Woody Guthrie, and she was working for the Huntington's Disease Foundation. And she said, you know, we don't have any treatment at all. Nobody is working on a treatment. But if we don't solve this problem, when somebody discovers a treatment, we're never going to get it. It'll never get out to the drugstores. And so she promised to help, and a lot of other people from other disease groups, narcolepsy, and I can't even begin to memorize them.
How did you know to reach out to them, Abby?
Well, reaching out to them and just calling them up on the phone and saying, hi, I'm the director of legislative activities for the Tourette Syndrome Association. They would answer the call. If I called just as a mother, they would not have. And so I found out that there's power there in getting some kind of title. And certainly when we started to go down to Washington to meet with elected people, it was they wanted to know what position we were in these support groups, because each support group represented to them a lot of voters, and that's what counted to them. But these came to an extraordinary explosive growth on a day when a young man, well, Henry Waxman, who was a congressman from California, was the chairman of one of the health committees in Congress. And there was a young man with Tourette syndrome living in his district. And his mother called me up because she said, he's on Pimicide. The Pimicide is working great, but we can't get it in the United States. So one of their friends, who was I think he was a psychologist, was going to Canada. She asked him to bring some back. And on his way back through the customs, they decided that the Pimicide was illegal. It was not an approved drug, and they confiscated it. So she called me up and said, I only have about 3 or 4 days of Pimicide left. What am I going to do? What should I do? And I said, call your congressman. And who is your congressman? And she said, Henry Waxman. And it was like a dream come true. So she spoke to Henry Waxman and his staff, and they said, we think we're going to just have a hearing on this. And they invited the pharmaceutical industry to come and testify to show why they don't want to make orphan drugs. And they all said no. Everybody from all of the companies said no. And so,
Abby, how this was in the when was this? In the late 70s or in the early 80s? When was this?
Early 80s. Yeah, I think it was like 1980, sometime in June, because you could really look up the whole script of what went on in Congress on that day. And it was, he said, just talk to me about what happened. And he had this young man with Tourette syndrome, and I talked about my son with Tourette syndrome. And then we had a doctor and a woman who, the woman had post-anoxic myoclonus, meaning that the lack of oxygen to her brain caused a disorder called myoclonus. And she was recovered because this doctor was making the drug in his laboratory at Mount Sinai in New York. But all of his recovered patients went in one day a week or one day every 2 weeks to help with mixing the drugs and putting it in capsules. It was extraordinary because you could just visualize this when you heard about it. And this is terrible. And so she testified about what the problem was. And the doctor said, yeah, I have my recovered patients coming in to make the drug. And that there was nobody in the big hearing room except for us at the front tables. And at the back of it was empty because nobody came to the hearing except for one young man. And I didn't know who he was. But I found out the following day he was a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, because to him, the fact that a young man from Los Angeles was testifying in front of Congress was very important. And so he wrote about the hearing. And because he did, I got a phone call in my office. He said he was the brother of Jack Klugman, and he had a rare form of cancer, and he was dying from this rare form of cancer. And he saw the report about what went on in Congress that day, and he feels that Jack Klugman, instead of just doing stories about mysteries, should write about real health problems that were happening. And the orphan drug problem was the first one. And he asked, would you be interested in helping with this? And of course, you know, it was wonderful. They made a script. We looked at the script, we made corrections where it was, and the program went on, and at the end of the program, they said, this is the story is fiction, but this is a serious, true problem. If you want to help with this, just write to me and I'll get the mail to the appropriate people. Well, thousands of people wrote to him, and they put all the mail into these huge sacks of mail, and they sent the sacks to me. And I didn't know what on earth to do with it, but these were the people who could back us up and make sure something got through Congress.
So let me interrupt for just a second here, because there are probably lots of folks here who don't know who Jack Klugman is.
Oh, yes, you're right.
So why don't you tell us, who is Jack Klugman and why was this such a big deal?
He was a very famous actor because he got most of his fame from television series. And he did that series, somebody who understands the titles of things would be better at this, but the series where he...
Quincy ME, right? Quincy Medical Examiner, right?
Well, yes, but this was one of the later shows that he was. His fame came earlier in other comedies, actually.
Oh.
And Tony Randall would play the other person, the serious problem, and The Odd Couple. That's the name of the show. And he was so famous from that. No matter what he did after that, people who loved Jack Klugman would watch. And so we started doing Quincy. It was a mystery. And each thing was to solve, why a person was murdered on the street or whatever. But this orphan drug problem was a real problem. And he wanted to help his brother.
Which is wild. I mean, for those of you who may not know who Jack Klugman is or what Quincy ME is, just to give some context, I think it would be fair to say Quincy ME in the 80s is sort of what Grey's Anatomy is now.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You're right.
And talk about just luck, right? That there was this one person, lone reporter in that hearing room where there were no representatives from industry there. He happened to write an article about the small hearing that happened, and Jack Klugman's brother happened to read it, he happened to get in touch with you and said, hey, I just happen to be the brother of the star of a famous show. We can do something here.
I didn't believe him when he started talking. I said, no, Jack Klugman's brother's not calling me. This is too much to believe.
I have to imagine when you got that phone call, you must have thought it was a prank call.
Yes, exactly. I did.
Right?
Yes.
So you worked on this episode together to shed light on the problem facing rare diseases.
Yes.
And so, now might actually, if you're okay with this, Abby, we actually took the liberty of working with Nord and getting access to that episode. And I'd like to play a clip from that episode. And just to tee it up, it's truly this story that you were just relating to us. It's about a kid who had Tourette syndrome, and he is now in Congress. And for those of you who don't know, Jack Klugman is the guy sitting in the back there. And he is testifying in Congress about the need for there to be some kind of legislation. So can we play this clip?
I'm thinking about the other victims. I mean, not just of Tourette's, but anyone who is unlucky enough to have a disease that never made it to the top 40. I'm thinking about a girl my age with myoclonus. It's another movement disorder. She gets her medication from a veterinary supply house. Chemical that isn't even pharmaceutically pure. because no drug company wants an Edsel. And here we're talking about an orphan drug that exists. What chance does a Wilson's or a Tay-Sachs disease have when all the drug companies are tripping over each other, trying to come up with a better diet pill or a better sleeping pill? The truth is that the only real chance of research money going to these diseases is if you, the Congress, make the orphan drug bill a reality. If you don't act, please think of all the people you'll be writing off.
I mean, it's clearly from the early 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's incredible. I have to ask, what did your son think about all of this that was going on?
To my children, mom is mom. They don't understand. I would have to say, okay, I'm going to go down to LaGuardia Airport. I'm going to take an airplane to Washington, D.C., and I'll see you guys about 6 o'clock tonight. And I'll do your laundry when I get here. So he was just, when he got a treatment that controlled his involuntary movements, not 100%, but just enough that the kids in school wouldn't make fun of him. He was just so happy. And to his mind, it's mom's job to get me to a doctor who knows what he's doing. So he didn't think it was any miraculous thing at all.
Things don't change, Abby. I think that's true. So this incredible episode airs during prime time, and there is a note at the end basically telling people that this is a real problem, and if it's something you're interested in or you're affected by, it gives them a contact number or address.
An address.
So people start writing letters, and all of those letters get routed to you. Right. How many letters are we talking about here?
Thousands. It took 3 months to get through them just by asking anybody I knew, my neighbors, my friends. Here's a few hundred. Could you read them and just write the name of the disease on the envelope? So I'll be able to answer it by getting information about that disease.
And so what happened then? So you've got all these letters, and now you have this Rolodex, basically, of people, right. Names, addresses, phone numbers.
Names and addresses, yes. And those are people who are willing to write to their congressman about this problem. And so I kept that list as a mailing list, and I created a newsletter called the Orphan Drug Update. And I would send them a newsletter every few months about what progress was made and what progress was not made, so that we still found ourselves with no legislation, or actually Henry Waxman wrote legislation, but it was stuck. We couldn't get it out of most of the committees that it had to go through.
So
you had to learn a whole lot of civics in order to understand it, because there are so many intricacies in Congress. You really don't know. You can't just say write letters to anything. You have to, that if a letter comes to a congressman from outside his district, he doesn't answer it. It just goes in the garbage. So only people who live in that district should write to that congressman.
And so not only did you have to educate yourself, you had to educate all of those folks on, here's who your congressman is.
Yes.
Here's who the congressman is.
Yes.
You need to write a letter to him or her, and this is what you need to say in the letter.
Right.
So off this letter writing campaign starts to congressmen. Henry Waxman is drafting an orphan drug bill. Are you involved in this process, Abby, during this time?
Yes. The orphan drug, we looked at a lot of possibilities. I mean, you could make the government into a drug manufacturer if you want to do that, but we didn't want to do it because it wouldn't work. If the the government becomes a drug manufacturer, the drug is going to fail. You need to get private industry involved. Well, how do you do that? You try to show them that if you manufacture this type of drug, it's not going to be unprofitable. You know, these are the incentives, financial incentives that we're going to give you. And it was very slow for the industry to pick up on this. But they did slowly. I mean, it was the very, very, very beginning of the biotechnology advent, and these things that they were developing were not. FDA did not say they were a drug because they were a biologic. It's like the natural thing that comes out of your blood. It's not a drug. It's a biologic. And so human growth hormone, all those hormones, it's a biologic. And so the FDA regulated that differently than drugs. And so you had to add biologics to the Orphan Drug Act. We had to come back a year later and add biologics to it because some of the most important products for treatment of rare diseases were biologics. You couldn't just ignore it.
Sure. So there's a bill that's being drafted. Henry Waxman is drafting this bill. So then what happens? And how long is this going on for?
Well, he introduced the bill fairly quickly, just I would say a couple of months after we had the hearing that the Los Angeles Times wrote about. And he wanted the industry to come and talk to him and say, oh, we like this part, we don't like that part. Industry didn't come and talk to him. Industry was determined that Henry Waxman's not going to win on this, even though if you look back on Henry Waxman's career, some of the most important health-related legislation was his legislation. Even in injections for children that nobody wanted to make because they were worried if a child is hurt, they're going to be sued for $1 gazillion. And no, he wrote a bill making it that you couldn't really sue if you were harmed by it, but there would be a sack of money that Congress controls, which would pay for your medical care for the rest of your life, so you wouldn't have to sue. I mean, it's just logic. And nobody else in Congress even thought about that, but he did. And I mean, he was extraordinary for health.
Yes.
And he's the man who said to the CEOs of tobacco companies, swear to me that nicotine is not addictive. And everybody who lived through that remembers their faces as they all swore it was not addictive. You know, that again, that was a health-related issue.
But at some point, though, there is a bill, the orphan drug bill, and it stalls, right? Can you talk about what happened?
Well, it stalled again because there was a senator who didn't like it. And the people from industry talked to him and said, we really don't want this to pass. Can you be sure that it won't pass? So he kept stopping it along the way. And so one day, the writer of the first Quincy show called me up and he said, well, what's happening? I said, what do you mean what's happening? He said, I'm reading the newspaper every day and I don't see anything about the Orphan Drug Act. What's going on? And I said, we have the senator there. And he's like, he will do anything to stop this law from even getting a hearing in the Senate. We can't move him. He is determined to make the law die. He said, all right, we'll just write another show about myoclonus and a senator who doesn't want the Orphan Drug Act to get passed. Well,
And so another Quincy Emmy show was born.
That's right. But before it was shown, I called up the senator's office and I said, I want you to watch this because this is about a senator who's stopping the Orphan Drug Act. And I don't know any other senator but yours who's doing it. So if the reporters call me after this is shown, I will tell them, you know, which senator is stopping it. Well, before it was shown, it was that night, before it was shown on the East Coast, the senator took his hold off the bill.
And I know what was special about this episode is that they really got the community involved, the rare disease community involved.
Yes, there was a part in there, and the writer said this to me on the phone. He said, look, we'll just get a lot of people with rare diseases and we'll make them, and we'll make a march on Washington. And I said, well, you know, that's nice and it'll probably work very well, except that it's very cold in Washington now and people with rare diseases, they really shouldn't be exposed to that. He said, oh, not to worry. There's a road in Van Nuys or Pasadena that looks just like Washington, D.C., and we'll use that. It was just apartment houses, but it was tall buildings. So. That's what they did. They made a march on Washington in Los Angeles. So, and people it didn't care because the people who were marching were truly rare disease patients. It was another way of just getting to the support groups, all of them saying, do you have any patients who'd be willing to, you know, make a phony march on Washington for this TV show? Well, they came out in droves. And, you know, Klugman came down just to say hello to them. He was so happy that they all came, and each one of them they had diseases that nobody could pronounce or spell. It didn't matter, really didn't matter. They got everybody's attention. And that's how the Orphan Drug Act got passed into law. It was another Jack Klugman thing.
It's such an incredible story, and that episode, we have that clip that you referenced, where there's this senator who's holding up the bill, and there's Jack Klugman persuading him, begging him to pass, and he's basically saying, "Who's your constituency?" So we'll play that clip, but just before we play that clip, I know I've been monopolizing this conversation. I want to encourage folks, I know we have lots of folks listening. If you have questions that you would like to ask Abby, please feel free to write them in the Q&A function. And we might not get to it right away, but we'll have a Q&A session that we will get to. So with that, let's just take, I think it's only about a minute clip. Let's take a listen.
I am running late, very late. Senator, before I came here, I heard that the House passed overwhelmingly the Orphan Drug Bill. We are not going to let the dream die this time.
Who's we? Where's your constituency, Doctor? If I choose to keep voting against this bill, it's simply because I think it's in the best interest of the nation.
Then you should be ready for the reaction.
There won't be any reaction. I played this course too many times.
Or maybe the rules have been changed. Why don't you take a look out the window, Senator?
And so those were all patients. It's incredible.
Yes. I have to say, though, I think people should especially companies should pay attention to this. First 10 years after the Orphan Drug Act was passed, there wasn't any big hallelujah moments. It was hard. A lot of companies just didn't want to believe in it, and they just ignored it. And what happened is eventually their competitors would come on the market with an orphan drug, and they wouldn't lose money, they would make a profit. And they said, oh my goodness, maybe we should look at these. And so for the first 10 years, it was very slow. But then the rest of the world realized what we were trying to do here, and they passed orphan drug laws. The first one was Japan, I think maybe 5 years after our orphan drug law passed. And then Europe asked us to come over, me and Marlene Hafner, who had the director, she was the director of orphan drug. And we went over and we explained to them what was needed in the law, if in our American law, and things that could be changed if you wanted to change it. And the European Union is just extraordinary. They've done a lot of orphan drugs. It's very, very interesting because they have a lot of genetic diseases in many of those countries. And then Asia heard about it. The fact that Japan did it, and nobody really wants to copy Japan because they don't like Japan, because Japan had occupied them during World War II. But they realized they need to do something about it because they had patients in their country who would say, why do I have to go to Taiwan to get this? Why can't I get it here? Yeah. And so Korea, South Korea, I mean, it's all over the world, orphan drug legislation to make it profitable to manufacture orphan drugs. And it has worked. And it's like, I could sit down and say, I'm finished, they don't need me anymore because it's on its own. The legislation is like, it's contagious. and all of the industrialized countries have orphan drug laws.
So one of the things that I thought was a really neat story when we spoke 10 years ago, because as Canary mentioned in her opening talk, which is in the US legislation, a rare disease is defined as one where the prevalence is less than 200,000.
Right.
And that's where did that number come from, Abby?
We were trying to settle, and this is at the time that the Orphan Drug Act, before it was passed, and the FDA wanted the number to be 100. Marion Finkel was the director at that point, and she wanted it to be 100. And I said, well, if you make it 100, then my son's disease probably won't make it on the list, and people with narcolepsy won't make it, and people with and I just named the diseases where they were more than 100 but less than 200,000, and those were the ones we were most worried about. And once I was able to name the diseases, she went back, researched it, and she said, you're right, we'll just make it 200,000.
And in hindsight, what would you do differently?
The biggest problem that we've had as defenders of the law is companies that have made so much profit from developing an orphan drug that everybody's criticizing them. And they not only criticize the company, but they criticize the Orphan Drug Act for enabling them to make so many billions of dollars. And at one point, we introduced a bill in Congress that would address the issue, and I forget exactly what it said, but it was something that would have worked not that anybody who manufactures the drug is going to make nothing. It was, you're going to make a profit, but we're going to have a cutoff on the profit. Well, the thing is, that law didn't pass. We got it through Congress, but we didn't get it through the White House. And so we just sat back and did nothing. And when we went to Europe to talk about an orphan drug law there, he said, well, what happens if somebody manufactures an orphan drug and charges so many gazillions of euros for it? What are we going to do? So we suggested that he looks at the law we had passed through Congress, even though it didn't become a law. And that's what he did. And he put that language into the European law so that if a country says at some point, we think this drug has become too profitable, then a group of countries would have to look at it. They would form some committee to look at the issue and decide whether the company should lose the remainder of their exclusivity. That's what it was. It wasn't to stop them from getting exclusivity. It was saying, keep your price low enough that you can do the whole 10 years, because their exclusivity is 10 years, not 7. They have that in their law, but nobody yet has been called on the rug because of it. They have not said to any manufacturer, you're making too much profit.
You know, it's so interesting, you know, when you come from an agency, and I had the real privilege of working at FDA and working in orphan products. And, you know, there are so many bills that get introduced all the time, and everybody's a critic, you know, and every bill, there's issues with every bill. What's been remarkable for me, though, is whenever folks talked about the Orphan Drug Act, yes, there were things on the margins that people would say, you know, maybe if we could tweak this or tweak that, we may. But by and large, the Orphan Drug Act was always touted as a success, you know, and I was just looking at the numbers this morning, and it's incredible. You know, we started off this session by saying before the passage of the Orphan Drug Act, there were only 10 drugs reportedly in the decade prior to that were approved, that were developed by industry. Now, when I went on FDA's website, there are, and I was surprised, there were close to 1,000 rare disease approvals. You know, it was something like 950 rare disease approvals.
Last I looked, it was over 700, and so now you're telling me it's over 1,000. Wow.
And think about, and from 1983 to now, so much has changed, and the reality is we would not be here but for that act. And so, thank you. I know that sounds so small, but thank you for everything that you've done.
I have to thank all of the support groups and all of the. You know, I used to talk to a woman who ran the support groups for. I forget, but doesn't matter, because I would say, how come you're so successful? You run this nonprofit and you always have enough volunteers, and, you know, it's really wonderful what you've done. And she said, listen, all you have to know is when you have a bunch of envelopes and you don't want to lick all the envelopes, you need to find a volunteer who will lick all the envelopes and maybe put a stamp on it and everything. So you would look at little things to drag the volunteer in, give him or her a job, and they feel that they really are helping.
That's right.
And that's the way it is. This is my world, the nonprofit world. You always have to have an envelope licker.
You know what? If I take nothing else from this talk, that's what I'm going to take. So I am taking a look at the time, and I know that I've seen a bunch of questions pop up. So I think maybe I will share the stage here and see if perhaps we can ask some of the questions that have been coming in. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Arpita, who I know has been monitoring the chat. Arpita, can I turn it over to you to maybe call out some questions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Abby, for taking us through to your journey. You're truly an inspiration to everybody, from how you've overcome these hurdles, worked with politicians, and also been a, just the parent that you are, to the son, to get this movement, not just for him, but everybody else that's, falling in your shoes throughout the way. So thank you so much for sharing that. We have a lot of different questions in the chat, and I wanted to go through as many as we can. And also to the audience members, we will have the opportunity to have live questions as well. So please use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to ask a live question. Our first question, Abby, has the orphan drug development over the past few decades lived up to your hopes and expectations as to what you've wanted it to be? And what would you still like to see accomplished?
Oh, it far surpassed all my expectations. It's just, that's why I have to look at the list every once in a while. I go to the website for the Office of Orphan Products at FDA. And, Dr. Rayo just told us it's over 1,000. And last I looked, it was at 700. I looked maybe a year and a half ago. So it's much more than I ever expected. And it's extraordinary that all of the companies are using it now. Nobody resents what the history of the law or any of the problems that we had back then. And that's what it was meant to do. It was meant to say to a person who has a stroke or has a very rare disease, narcolepsy or whatever, you matter as much as the person who had the stroke, and a company that makes a drug for their condition is also going to make yours for narcolepsy. And that's the beautiful part of it, because we used to have to make excuses for why aren't companies developing this.
Right. Thank you also for taking us through that journey in terms of how, industry and the politicians and kind of the movement that you wanted, and that battle. And it's great to understand how you overcame those hurdles. Our next question is with regards to some of the key differences. Did the Orphan Drug Act treat various different rare diseases differently? Were there categorizations in terms of, well, this category of rare diseases will be taken first versus second, or any type of that delineation?
No, it was just the amount of research that had been done up to the time that we got the Orphan Drug Act, and how much research needed to be done after that. And they all came in the queue when their research was done. We didn't have this emergency thing that we have now for putting a drug on the market because it prevents the flu. And even though most of the research is not done, we didn't have that. They had to do all of the research. Only thing that was different was, and if you read the Orphan Drug Act later, much years later, we created a law that is a paragraph in the thing that says for medical devices that medical devices can be designated as orphan devices, and so they have a whole different area of research that they have to do, and they are close to what it is to develop a drug. But if you get a device as an orphan drug that can be an orphan device, you're going to be able to develop it to a certain point, get it on the market before it's finished, and then get it fully approved as a regular medical device after that.
Thank you for taking us through that as well and letting us know that, obviously earlier you mentioned then we had to go back a year later and biologics needed to be added, and now also drugs and devices as well. So
yes.
That's expanding, and it's ever better to know that it is, and that these are helping patients with rare diseases. We have one more question that had come from the chat that I'll address, and then that I'll ask to you, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. You had done a New York Times issue in the 90s where a lot of people wrote to you with their symptoms and diagnoses. They were frustrated, as they were the rare disease patients as well. Has the type of people that are seeking help today in 2020 and 2021, has that changed from back in the 80s?
No, it hasn't changed, but back in the 80s, once they finally got the diagnosis, then they found out there's no treatment. So you can imagine how they felt. Now there is a treatment, so they don't even know it's an orphan drug. To them, this whole thing doesn't matter, and it's not really something that's necessary because they got a diagnosis and they got the treatment the next day or two. And so they didn't realize that this was one of the drugs that I'm talking about.
And that's great to know that it's a seamless process, that it's been kind of well known and worldwide now.
It's also important to know that about 50% of all orphan drugs, about 50% is drugs for cancers, rare cancers. There's a lot of cancers out there, hundreds, and many of them are very rare.
We'd like to open it up to the floor for questions now. Please use the raise your hand feature so we can unmute you.
I can ask a question, if it's okay, while we're waiting for a meeting to happen. What is the proudest moment that you've had, Abby, in your journey over 30 years?
It's exactly that, when I meet somebody who's sick and they tell me what their diagnosis is, and they name the drug, and I'm saying, this is an orphan drug. I'm sorry, this wouldn't be here if it wasn't for everything that I did with all those volunteers at the time. So I'm very, very proud when the answer that they give me is an orphan drug. But again, they don't know. They don't know that it is an orphan drug. It doesn't matter to them. It's just that they got it. They were sick. They got their treatment.
I don't know, Abby, I don't know if there are other questions, but I have one more. And it's remarkable to see all the faces come up, many of whom are colleagues here at Rocket and at RTW, and some are with patient advocacy organizations and folks we've known from other parts of our lives. So I guess my question is two parts. One, selfishly speaking, since there are so many of us here from Rocket, what advice would you want to give us as a gene therapy company that is really passionate and devoted to developing products for rare diseases? So sort of specific to us as we continue on. And two, because it's not just Rocket and there are advocacy groups and patients, what would you tell them as they're trying to figure out what to do in terms of trying to find options for their loved ones?
Well, gene therapy is a new technology, and I was involved with it from the beginning because I was on a government committee called the RAC. It was a RAC. It was Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee. And so I had to read through all of the research proposals that companies gave or academic scientists, and you'd read through it and you'd say, I don't really understand the science. Let the scientists on this committee tell me whether it's good or not. But I would always focus on the informed consent document because I wanted to be sure that the patients were told exactly the truth and what is not known. That's the most important thing. What's not known and what information might be discovered that's going to help this technology to work. And what I found, and I hate to say this, but what I found is most of the informed consent documents were not written by the doctor who was doing the research. Most of it was done by the lawyers for the hospitals where the research was being done. And so it didn't address anything that the patients were most interested in. That's what I was focused on. And I think that, you know, I would say, change this sentence, change that sentence. And I could see that they would say, oh, this crazy lady, why do I have to do that? But all I want you to do is tell the truth and make sure that you leave information in there saying, we don't know the answer to this question. That's why we're doing the research. So I think it's really important that I was on the rack at the time that Dr. Wilson made that terrible mistake. The young man died. And so I care very much about it. I also want it to work. And for my entire time on that committee, it didn't work.
And perhaps to close this out, Abby, because you've been so generous with your time, last thoughts to parents who may be finding themselves in the shoes that you found yourself in back when you got the diagnosis for your son.
Well, I didn't explain actually how I got the diagnosis, so I'll tell you that my son at the point had the worst symptoms that he ever had. And his arms, he could not keep his arms still. So he had his arms flying around. And when he was eating, I would have to put the food on the fork, and then he would go like this, and it would end up on the wall. And it was just horrendous because at the end of a meal, I had not just to clean up the kitchen, but I had to clean up the walls because his arms were like this and food was flying off the floor. And I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. So I think I'm going to go into the living room and relax. And it was a Sunday. So I sat down and Parade magazine was there, which is in the newspaper. And I opened it up and started reading a story about a nice young man named Orrin who had Tourette syndrome. And the years that it took until they got a diagnosis for him. And I knew immediately, I said, this is what he has, named his symptoms so accurately. So I called my husband in, I said, you have to read this. And he agreed, this is what my son had. So that was the eureka moment, because we had to diagnose him before the doctor. I took the article to the pediatrician the following day and had him read it. And he said, you're right, this is what he has. So it was extraordinary. Yeah. And you would think that I would lose faith in that doctor. I didn't. The doctor cared very much about it. He wanted to give me an answer, but he couldn't because he didn't know what he was looking at.
So
you must know that feeling, right?
Sure. Building on that, you had a wonderful idea in terms of creating a mechanism by which companies could pursue therapies for uncommon disorders. Even in this day and age, we still find so many times where patients with unusual disorders end up bouncing around from one healthcare provider to another before they're diagnosed. And here we are living in this age of so much information, and yet it seems like there's so many times when it's very difficult for people, whether they're committed caregivers or less than that, very difficult to make a diagnosis of an uncommon disorder in a timely manner. What might some other good ideas be that a company like Rocket or some of our hospital partners or anyone who cares about could do to make it more likely that somebody with something strange and dangerous and puzzling gets a diagnosis quickly, gets into the right hands, not after 8 months or 18 months, but maybe after a few weeks, so that there's a chance for a good diagnosis to be made promptly. What have we not been doing, despite all the powerful computers and advances in publishing that has still prevented so many children and adults from being diagnosed in a timely way?
Well, I think it has gotten somewhat better in recent years. It's better than it used to be, and that is the wonderful internet access. It's really made a major difference. But there are still many patients who can't get the diagnosis. Every doctor just scratches his head. When NIH did, they were so tired of hearing from people who said I can't get a diagnosis. They started an undiagnosed disease section at NIH, and you could refer patients down there. They're going to go on a waiting list, but they do complete physicals. They take all kinds of tissues and blood samples and everything else. And for many patients, they get a diagnosis before they leave the hospital. So I would do that. I would look at the undiagnosed diseases department. There is an office for rare diseases at NIH. So you could probably access this other office through that. Yeah. It's just a shame. I wish we could just put people into a machine and say, okay, one of those, what's his name, the comedian, Woody Allen, and you put a person into a machine and he comes out and he knows all the answers.
I have a feeling that's coming in the next 10 years. So Abby, I know we're running up on time here. So on behalf of Rocket and all the rest of us who had the good fortune of spending this time with you, thank you so much again for sharing the story with us. It's inspirational. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
It was our pleasure. It was our pleasure. I would like to now turn it over to Gaurav Shah, who is not only our CEO and a physician, but he is also a Grammy-nominated musician. So he's a little bit of an underachiever. And he is here to talk about something that he cares very passionately about. And it's really bringing together music, arts, and science in this spirit where the idea that to really heal, you have to heal both the mind and the body. I'm sure I'm not doing it full justice, so I will turn it over to Gaurav to take it away.
Thank you, Gayatri. Can you hear me? Okay. I think Abby is still on, although I don't see the video right here. But first of all, Abby, on behalf of everyone here, we're so inspired humbled and honored that you shared your personal experiences with us. And it's unbelievable how you transformed in a very real way your personal experiences into a force of change in the world that impacts so many people. So I can't thank you enough personally. Thank you. And Gayatri, to you for taking that great vision and bringing it to the FDA and being a force for change there. And for Canary for taking that rare disease, orphan drug vision and helping create a company around it in gene therapy. So thank you all for putting this together today. And to everybody here, it's a motley crew of rocket people and non-rocket people. So this is the first of many, and we hope you join us for the other 3 to come. I think there should be some slides. Yeah, great. Go to the next slide. Art and medicine really go hand in hand, right? Art can inspire medicine, medicine can inspire art. I think this colorful painting by a child who was affected by rare disease of a zebra, which is a rare animal, reminds us pretty vividly that rare is exceptional. Many of us are right now at home with our families, so we're asking, first of all, in this realm of where art meets science and they're really one and the same thing, we're looking for submissions that symbolize Rare Disease Day, drawings, handprints, whatever comes to mind. And we would love to showcase these drawings and paintings in the 3 sessions coming up for the rest of the month. So please submit any such pictures or drawings to be your kids, nieces, nephew, could be you. We're all children at heart. So it could be from anybody. Thank you. Next slide. So a few years ago here at Rocket, we started this, we call it a movement. It's not called biomusica. Medicine heals the body. I think meditation can heal the mind. Music and the arts can heal the soul. Body, mind, and soul. Biomusica. And jazz music is very special in the types of music out there in the world. It is a style that has been around for 150 years, and it's highly improvisational. Great jazz musicians create the melody as they go, and they're informed by their talent, by their knowledge, by their instincts, and by joy. Just as a rocket is bound for the stars, jazz musicians live at the edge of discovery, new frontiers inspired by the heart, mind, and soul. The field of rare disease is actually no different, if you think about it. We all have to be creative, we have to be nimble, we have to be true explorers. So since jazz and rare disease are so similar, why not combine them today? So as one of the early performances for Biomusica and in celebration of Rare Disease Month, I'd love to introduce my colleague, friend, and one of my musical heroes. I'm a big fan, in the next slide, of the next slide, yeah, Ben Patterson. Ben Patterson, I've known him for many years. He's a Steinway artist. He's an internationally acclaimed musician. He's performed with the likes of B.B. King. And in 2018, he was the winner of the first Alice Marsalis jazz piano competition that was international. So with that, I'll hand this over to Ben. And I think with the understanding that the left and right sides of the brain are really one. And we draw as much from the left side, bring it to the right side to the left, art, science, medicine.
All right, thanks so much for having me as part of this virtual event leading up to the 14th International Rare Disease Day. I'm very honored to be part of this, so thanks so much to all of you. I've been on the meeting for a little while, and just hearing some of these stories and everything is really amazing and inspiring. So thanks for all the work that you guys all are doing. So in the theme of the 1920s, I'll start with a tune by great pianist Fats Waller. This is one of the big hits of the 1920s. This was called Ain't Misbehavin'. All right, Ain't Misbehavin' by the great Fats Waller from back in the 1920s. I was trying to think of what songs would be a good fit for today, and I thought of one which I'll do next. But first, for some reason, I don't know why, just because it's a pretty tune and a lot of people know it, and maybe it fits. Just a great song. This is from a little bit later, from the 30s, but this is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. right. That's Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I don't know why I love that tune, but everybody loves that tune, right? What can you do? So I'm going to do one more song for you guys. Once again, thanks so much for having me as part of this. I know you have a series every Friday, so you know, to be part of the first one is an honor. So thanks so much. I was thinking again about what songs would be appropriate for this, and this is definitely not from the 1920s, but it's a theme that I think fits with being a friend to the rare disease community. And so hopefully, forgive me if it's not from the 1920s, but hopefully you guys will enjoy this one. You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. When the road seems rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed, you just remember what your old pal said, 'cause you've got a friend in me. Oh yeah, you've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. You've got troubles, I've got them too, but there ain't nothing that I wouldn't do for you. We'll stick together and we'll see them through, 'cause you've got a friend in me. Oh yeah, you've got a friend in me. Some folks out there might be smarter than I am, bigger and stronger too, but there's no way they're gonna love you the way I do. It's me and you, and as the years go by, our friendship will never die. You're gonna see it's our destiny, 'cause you've got a friend in me. That's right, you've got a friend in me. Some folks out there might be smarter than I am, bigger and stronger too, but there's no way they're gonna love you the way I do. It's me and you, and as the years go by, our friendship will never die. You're gonna see it's our destiny, 'cause you've got a friend in me. Oh yeah, you've got a friend in me. That's right, you've got a friend in me. All right, you've got a friend in me. Plus a couple old jazz tunes for you guys. Thanks so much for having me as part of this beautiful, beautiful event. And stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks again, Gaurav, for having me, and to everyone at Rocket Pharma. And yeah, stay well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. So uplifting, especially in the middle of the day, and really inspires us to go back and do what we do even better. So thank you. So beautiful. And I will close this out relatively rapidly. Thank you all for coming. Ben has been an anchor for us through the pandemic on Saturdays and Sundays with his virtual concerts. I've been to so many of them on a Saturday afternoon at 4 or sometimes Sunday at 1 or 2. And it sort of helped us, many of us, a few of us here, but a large group of fans around the world to get through 2020 with his music and with his voice. And I encourage everyone here to visit benpatterson.com, www.benpatterson.com, for upcoming streaming concerts and in the future live ones, face to face. Really look forward to it. I had a chance to see Ben live in person when he was in New York several years ago, and I look forward to resuming that. And next week, please come back here, same time, same place, similar panel. And it is at 11 a.m. Friday, February 12th, revealing the power of genetic testing. We hope to see you then. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm so happy about how well this Rare Disease Month has launched. And I think to close this out, we should just say that we are all part of something that is so much bigger than ourselves, and it's bigger than Rocket Pharma. We're part of a community treating rare disease for people around the world. It is so much bigger than any one individual or any one company, and it is for the betterment of our species moving forward. We're changing how humans live millennia or millions of years. It's a big deal. Thank you for being a part of that journey.
Thank you, everyone, for your passion, commitment, and Gayatri, thank you so much for having Abbey join us. That was so inspirational. And Ben, thank you for joining us, and loved the last song, especially the last song. That was a perfect addition to end this amazing day, but also to kick off this amazing month for raising awareness for rare diseases. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, great weekend, and we will see you next Friday at 11 a.m.